Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Taking a look at some transfer portal grades, and Dill, coming up on this Ole Miss program, we've been very adamant. I don't think there's a program across the country that has done a better job in the transfer portal heading into 2024 than Lane Kiffin, this Ole Miss program. I think they looked at where they needed to address to kind of close that gap, not only in the SEC, but really to be a national title contender. I think they checked a lot of boxes, want to get into what we really liked about this Ole Miss transfer portal class. At this point, we've broken down almost every single commitment in this transfer portal class. Now we get a kind of opportunity to take a bird's eye approach, kind of put a bow on what this Ole Miss program has done in the portal. Extremely fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Ole Miss fans. I mean, it's been a blast talking this program. Many of you guys know by now the fellas are extremely high on this Ole Miss team heading into 2024. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section in terms of your favorite transfer portal additions. And Dale, that's how we're going to get this started. We're going to get to our Ole Miss transfer portal grade. I don't think a lot of you are going to be surprised by the transfer portal grade, but Dale, let's get into, two of your favorite transfer portal additions Lane Kiffin, this Ole Miss program made.
Number one for me, and I think it's by a lot, is Princely U. I think when you look at Ole Miss, it never felt like they quite had that like day one NFL talent on that defensive line. And you see some guys coming up. Suntrain Perkins looks like he might be that guy. But again, you just didn't see that guy who was going to get 10 plus sacks a game. You're kind of in that 5 range for your better guys. I think bringing him to the equation gives you that potential to make more of those like game-changing plays that, again, I just didn't think Ole Miss was making consistently enough. And the other one I'm going to go with is Julius Buello from Washington. I think, again, another thing you look at from Ole Miss is a little bit of depth issues in their offensive line. It felt like at times when the season wore on, it felt like that unit wasn't playing as well as maybe it was early. I think bringing him in, he's a perfect fit. Big, physical, can play that style of ball. I thought he looked really good against Michigan, frankly, although the Washington offensive line as a whole didn't. I thought he stood his ground and looked good, but he can also move. He plays in that athletic kind of Washington style. I think that's big for Ole Miss because you see they like to run the ball outside a lot. They need their offensive linemen to be able to move. So those to me are their big gets, if you will.
I'll echo the Princely U. And you talk about what makes those defenses national championship caliber defenses. You look back at Michigan, you look back at Georgia, like all of those programs had that alpha dog pass rusher that during those third and long situations, they could pin their ears back, get after the quarterback. I think you make a great point. I don't know if you had that for Ole Miss the last couple of years. Yes, you had some solid edge rushers. Princely U, in my mind, probably would have been a day 2 NFL draft pick. But more importantly, last year, the last 2 years, has been one of the better pure pass rushers that we saw in college football. I think he completely revolutionizes this defense. To go to my top 2 transfer portal additions, one, I'm going to go to Diego Pounds. And I think that was a brilliant addition for Ole Miss. It was so hard to find starting caliber tackle play in the portal. Ole Miss was able to do it. You go back and look at Diego Pounds, played a phenomenal game against Clemson. That's an NFL caliber defensive line, 466 pass pro opportunities. He gave up 8 quarterback hurries and 2 sacks, was an all ACC caliber tackle. That was a massive addition. The second one I'm going to go to, and it's a little bit of a my guy kind of pick, Trey Amos coming over from Alabama. He didn't play a lot last year because he was behind 2 first-round cornerbacks in Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. You kind of read through the tea leaves. He was that third cornerback. He was supposed to be that cornerback 1 for Alabama. What does Ole Miss go out and do? They go out and grab Alabama's projected number 1 cornerback, bring him to Oxford. I thought those were 2 really sneaky good additions. And obviously, we didn't mention a guy like Juice Wells, one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. Didn't mention a guy like Walter Nolan, a former 5-star defensive lineman. Difference makers all over the field for Ole Miss that were brought into the portal. Dill, getting into some overarching takes that I really appreciated from Ole Miss. One, they didn't lose a lot of production. And you see a lot of teams, aka like a team like Colorado, for example, that they're going to bring a lot of talent in. They also lost a lot of talent. It was kind of a revolving door. You look at Ole Miss and what they lost in the portal. outside of Quinshon Judkins, which I think we already kind of discussed that. I think that made sense for Ole Miss in terms of just allocating some resources to some more important positions. Now, outside of Quinshon Judkins, this team brought in 20 transfers. Much of them were really high quality starting caliber guys. You look at some of the names they lost, they didn't lose that many guys that were going to be contributors in 2024. And that's something that's really important. If you're going to be aggressive in the portal, you want to make sure you're retaining your talent. And I think Ole Miss, even though they brought in 20 guys and a lot of them starting caliber dudes, I think they did a really good job retaining a lot of their production difference makers heading into the 2024 year.
And especially on the lines of scrimmage where you need especially to be deep. Like you look at their defensive line, yeah, they bring in a bunch of really good players, but you retain J.J. Pegas, Jared Ivey, Suntrain Perkins, Xavier Harris. Like you keep a good chunk of what the nucleus was last year. Again, lose a couple guys to pros. That is like part of the game, and that's a good thing. You want to be able to put pros in the league, but you keep the guys who I think needed to be there as depth pieces and to be able to, again, be able to roll 2 or 3 defensive lines, which it didn't always feel like they could last year.
And that kind of segues into my second point about Ole Miss and the transfer portal. And we've talked about this a lot. And quite frankly, I think at times in the early transfer portal era, I think Lane Kiffin might have struggled with this in terms of how are we going to use the portal? Are we just going to grab everyone and try to bring just as many bodies as we can in? Or are we going to be kind of calculated and methodical? Yes, Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss team brought in 20 transfers, much more methodical and calculated in terms of, hey, we were 11-2 last year with our only 2 losses coming to Alabama and Georgia. Where do we need to close that gap? The gap's not that big. I think a lot of Ole Miss fans know that. Where on our roster did we not get up to par with Alabama and Georgia? I think a lot of Ole Miss fans agree it was along the line of scrimmage. We talked about bringing in Diego Pounds, Walter Nolan, Princely U. I think they addressed their needs in the portal, which, again, is something that you don't see a lot of programs do. Again, going to Colorado, they're just bringing bodies in with kind of not much calculation or methodically. I think Ole Miss was extremely methodical in terms of addressing their cracks in their roster in the transfer portal. That was another thing I really appreciated about Lane Kiffin Ole Miss.
You know, that does stand out because everyone knew they had to get better on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think you look in their secondary room, obviously had a lot to replace there, sent a bunch of guys to the NFL, really good players. So you had to get better, but you bring in some veteran guys. It's not only just a bunch of young guys. And frankly, the way they play defense, it is a little bit of that Saban-esque style from Pete Golden's time at Alabama. So you need guys who are pretty savvy or experienced, can play a little bit of zone, a little bit of man. And I think they bring in a bunch of versatile players in that secondary who've played a lot of football, and I think can pick up on the defense quickly. Because again, when you kind of do use the portal the way Ole Miss does, you need to have guys who can pick it up quick because they're not staying in the system all the time for forever. And especially when you got to replace a whole room full of guys, I think it's big to add a bunch of veterans in that room too.
So getting to the transfer portal grade, and I mean, I don't think I've ever given an A+ to a team in the transfer portal. I mean, if you can give an A+, it's certainly an A. Like, I don't think there was many things that Ole Miss didn't do well. Again, you look across the country, you're comparing them to other programs in the portal. I don't think a team got better as much as Ole Miss. I'm going to give them an A. Dill, I guess I'll ask you, what was your grade for Ole Miss?
I probably an A- just because I think they could. I like what they did in the secondary room, but when you got to bring in that many new faces, I do question, like, are they going to be deep enough in that room to be at the level they need to be? And that's like, I mean, you're splitting hairs a little bit, frankly, because you look at what Ole Miss did. Everyone with eyes can see that they brought an elite class as good as anyone else in the country, in my opinion. I just think you did need to bring in a lot of guys that felt like in that, and especially in that corner room, are they going to be deep enough to kind of just play a whole season and play really good?
Yeah, so if I ever go back to school, remind me to never take you as a professor. That's correct. That's an A-. You're an awfully difficult grader. Let's close it out on this. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot because we didn't plan on asking you this question. If you were to pick a sleeper that Ole Miss brought in through the transfer portal, where are you going? Because I got a name.
You know who I like is Lewis Moore from Indiana.
Yeah,
I think people, again, he's a guy who nobody from Indiana gets any credit. They were really bad towards the end of Tom Allen's tenure, but I thought he looked really good in the games. He flies around, he makes a lot of plays, he can tackle really well, which again, I think is huge and something Ole Miss has kind of been developing and working on, being a little bit better, being able to be physical and bring guys to the ground. I think Lewis Moore can do that, and it's a position in need. I think that was a big get for them.
I'm going to go with DeQuan Wright from Virginia Tech. This was a guy that when he hit the portal way back in December, I kind of was banging the table for him. Ole Miss kind of started kicking the tires. They eventually landed that commitment. I like Caden Prescorn. I think he's a really solid tight end that can command the middle of the field. DeQuan Wright, from an athletic profile standpoint, gives you a little bit more juice. And I think Lane Kiffin looks at a matchup nightmare in DeQuan Wright, who's 240 plus, 6'4 plus, runs an 11-second 100-meter dash. In terms of that's a matchup nightmare. And you look at Lane Kiffin and how he really thrives on offense. It is getting some of those playmakers opportunities to really put a stamp on the game. I think DeQuan Wright is somebody that Lane Kiffin is going to get to absolute work with. And again, not a ton of production in his first 2 years at Virginia Tech, more or less because that Virginia Tech passing attack wasn't all that good. I think DeQuan Wright has the chance to be one of the better tight ends that we see in the SEC. Lane Kiffin, I think you might see some 2 tight end sets for this program. I'm really fired up about him. Again, Ole Miss crushing the transfer portal. I think a national title contender in 2024. We're going to be talking a lot about this program over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.